Congresswoman Maxine Waters is considered by many to be one of the most powerful women in American politics today. She's also made history as the first woman and first African-American chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Congresswoman Waters, great to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's great to see you again. We have been focused today on, how we not make this, a day, a trip through Black History Month, where we check off the box, talk about these, issues of systemic racism and discrimination. What we're trying to do is talk about really moving the needles and making progress in this time, which I know you're very committed to. But I want to ask you and start by focusing on some of the things you pointed out via Twitter and other places about your concerns about the rise of white supremacist movements, terrorism, radicalism under the era of President Trump, and whether or not you're beginning to feel better about where we're now, but what are your ongoing concerns about the security of this country and the rise of white supremacist movements?
Well, thank you so very much. And, I really appreciate the question because, now that we have this country and maybe this world focused on what happened here in Washington, D.C., January 6th, where our Capitol was invaded by insurrectionists, perhaps we can get more real interest in people understanding how big this movement is of white supremacists, including everything from the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers to QAnon, et cetera, and understanding more about what they do and whom they are and what danger they present for, all of us. And so with this focus, this discussion, I think makes good sense. Legislators who were absolutely targeted at risk, thinking more about public policy. This country has a long history of domestic terrorism. Don't forget, I'm a descendant of slaves and, of course, of all of the lynchings that took place in this country, with perhaps over 5,000 Black people having been lynched prior to, the big movement for separation in this country. So let me just say that we must recognize it. We must call it for what it is. We must have laws specifically dedicated to dealing with domestic terrorism. And we must, in every way that we can, help to educate people about what it is, what we can do. It must be talked about in our schools at every level of education, in our elementary schools, in our colleges and universities. And we must do everything that we can to deal with what now is a growing movement with all of these social media platforms recruiting and financing these movements.
Congresswoman Waters, how much do you think the current Republican Party is dependent on I hate to put it this way, the QAnon crowd, the conspiracy theory crowd, the white supremacist crowd? How much, as you look at it, I know you talk to legislators across the aisle, and we saw this interesting thing where when there was a blind ballot, Liz Cheney was held in place. If there's not a blind ballot, you don't see that same sort of stance on some of these things. So I'm just sort of interested in how, when you talk to your colleagues, are they scared of their base, of President Trump's base?
Well, my colleagues don't really talk about that. As a matter of fact, they keep their mouths closed, but their actions speak louder than words. They're obviously intimidated by them. They're afraid of them, led by the President of the United States of America, but they certainly know for sure whom they are and what they do. But no, you don't get a lot of conversation from them about how terrible it is. As a matter of fact, they should be more vocal now and absolutely disengaging themselves in any way from any of them and not being aligned with them, not turning a blind eye to them. They know who many of them are in their districts, but they do not admit it. As a matter of fact, they kowtower to them. And so, no, they don't talk about it. And we've got to keep bringing it out in the open. They are more prepared to align themselves with the President of the United States, who's aligned with these domestic terrorists, than they are for protecting democracy and this country and the Constitution of the United States of America. And that is what's so amazing to me. I never thought I would see that, because Republicans, for the most part, being more conservative, have always held out that they were more patriotic than anybody else. And they've waved this flag, the same flag that they had when they invaded the capital of the United States, the same flag that they claim to honor and love and protect, was seen in the midst of this invasion of our capital, using it to beat up on people and to basically attack our Capitol Police, et cetera. And so they don't talk about it, but they know it exists. And I consider them complacent because they don't admit it.
Now, Congresswoman, a lot of conservative TV showed pictures of you after the debacle of children being separated from their parents at the border and others, and you said, we can't let that administration be comfortable just thinking this is status quo. And there was an effort to equate your comments about that to the January 6th insurrection. I'd love to give you a chance to respond to those people who tried to equate what you were saying at that moment to what happened with the insurrection on January 6th.
You're absolutely correct. I was in a rally that was organized by parts of my community, Westchester, combined with Santa Monica and Culver City and those areas. These were some nonprofits, these were moms, these were homeowner association, and they all came in preparation for their trip to go to the border to take toys and other kinds of useful things to the children. And so in this rally, I joined with some of the restaurateurs who had already started a movement to let members of the administration, the Trump administration, know that they should be ashamed of themselves for supporting that policy and that they were not welcome in their restaurants. And so I took off on that theme, and I basically told them, you're not welcome anywhere because of the Cajun of these children. And of course, they attempted to use that to say this was synonymous with what the president was saying. Well, I want to tell you, many people did not buy that. They saw the difference. They know that I never even talked about attacking anybody. They never talked about fight and charge on anything or anybody. And so even Jake Tapper, one of the finest journalists that we have, defended me and talked about, no, that's not the same. And you can't try and somehow hide what the president did, behind saying, look at the other people, they're doing the same thing. Look at Maxine Waters. It didn't work, and it certainly doesn't bother me, because we know that it is not true for them to equate my advocacy for the children that are in cages still, but this administration is doing a great job of connecting many of them with their parents now. I just saw that information today. And so, yes, they attempted it, but it doesn't work, and it doesn't bother me.
I really appreciate you speaking to that. I think it's very important. Let me just ask you finally a kind of big topic question. As we talk today about, moving the needle on this, what we're really talking about is, there hasn't been trust across society. There hasn't been fairness, hasn't been equity. There's been systemic racism. People haven't walked in each other's shoes. I am really interested when we talk about trying to restore trust and fairness, what are some of the best pathways you would suggest as we go into this and try to get people to understand what it is like to be the descendant of people who were slaves, to the descendant of people who had redlining against them, the descendant of people who in this COVID crisis are bearing the burden of this much more? There's a trust deficit out there, and I know you're a strategist. So share with us the strategy to try to get back to some restoration of trust and fairness in this society.
Well, I'd like to try and attempt to do that. But before attempting to do that, let me tell you the disinformation and the way that Bannon talks about race and the way that the president has talked about it, they exacerbate these feelings of distrust. And they are talking about taking back our country. It's talking about The Jews shall not replace us. And so they fan the flames of the fire constantly. And they have a big platform from which they do it, which makes it very difficult to do exactly what you're talking about. People start to look over their shoulder even more. And, African Americans are saying, well, can I trust all white people? Can I trust the physicians at the hospital? Can I trust the teachers? Can I trust? And I mean, I've heard more of that now than even I've heard, during my entire career. So I think that number one, and this is, the kind of lesson that, people may not pay a lot of attention to, but what parents and families do in the rearing of their children, and they're engaging with them on the questions of our society and about respect for others, et cetera, and the acceptance of other cultures, and is so very important. I just read a story about a mother and a child, and the little girl purchasing a doll, and I think she was trying to purchase maybe a second doll. I don't know. I can't remember those details. But when they went to the store and the little girl, who was white and the mother was white, picked out a brown skinned doll, the sales clerk said, "Are you sure you want that doll?" And the mother, the little girl said, "Yes, I like her." And the mother had to, look at the sales lady strangely and try and send signals that she should not be trying to discourage her from buying that doll. But this kinds of things go on in everyday life. And it's been going on in different ways, in so many ways. And I'm not simply talking about the big discriminatory ways, the big racism of, redlining or predatory lending and housing and all of that. I'm talking about the everyday contact. So one of the things I would recommend is for the many whites who really are just absolutely opposed to what they see in these domestic terrorists and these racists, pay attention to what's going on in the family and the neighborhoods, the neighborhood councils, when people get together. The churches are still separate. On Sunday, you got the white churches, you got the black churches. There are few that are integrated, but not many. And so what are the ministers doing who have the power to influence so many parishioners? And so many people have to take a part in determining and absolutely coming to grips with, we all play a role in this. And I want our schools to have Black history, starting in our elementary grades, so that, people understand not only the history of the country, but what has happened to disenfranchise and to, create this separation. So that's all very important. And then those of us who are considered in positions of power, we've got to use our power to do everything that we can public policy wise to bring this to the fore. For example, being the first woman and the first African American to become the chair of the Powerful Financial Services Committee, I created a subcommittee on diversity and inclusion so that interacting with the financial sector of our society, I can talk with them about who are you hiring? What are the opportunities for upward mobility? Do you have a department on diversity and inclusion? Do you have someone that reports to you about what kind of advances you're making? And that is beginning to work out pretty well with many of our banks and with Wall Street that are coming up with diversity and inclusion departments and individuals. So I think those of us who have the ability, because we have some positions of power and influence, should use that instead of simply seeking out perks for ourselves and falling into the tradition of doing things the way that they're always done. We have to break out from that, and we have to use our positions to open up these opportunities. And so when we become elected officials, this has to be a part of our ongoing agenda. dealing with our town hall meetings, dealing with our constituents, and all that we can while we have these powers, centers of influence to help, people to understand exactly what is going on and exactly what could make for a better world for all of us. Now, I want to just share something with you. There's
Sure.
this book called The Devil You Know by a very, very
Show it up a
competent.
little bit more.
Okay.
There you go.
This
Yeah, there
is
you go.
by
Yep.
Charles Blow.
Charles Blow, my friend.
Yeah. Well, he's one of the, writers for the New York Times.
Yeah.
And he's written, several books, but this is his latest one, The Devil You Know. And it discusses, what happened in this country with migration from the South and blacks, going north, et cetera. And he talks about power and how to amass power. And it's very interesting that he has, experienced what he's experienced. He's seen what he has seen in all of the people who have tried so hard to deal with these kinds of issues. He's now advocating for African Americans to take a look at moving back south and taking over the entire southern region, because you have places like Jackson, Mississippi, where the majority in that city are black. You have other places in South Carolina where the majority now are blacks, and increasingly you have black mayors and elected officials. And he's thinking that if you ever want to really have equality in the United States Senate, for example, sending 2 senators from several of the states, or all of the states in the Deep South, would certainly create influence and power. And he's talking about how you amass power, given everything that we've gone through, everything that we've experienced. If we want to exercise power, power is what corrects, the deficiency in these relationships. So this is very interesting. And I read it once, I'm going to read it twice. I've talked to him about it. And I'm going to help put together some of the mayors of the South and see what they think about it.
We'll do a show with Charles, whom I know, and you, if you want. We'll call him up, say, hey, let's kind of take this on the road.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me ask you, my team is going to get so upset with you, but I'm going to ask one last question of you, Congresswoman.
Yes.
Joe Biden spoke about systemic racism in his State of the Union address. You are chair of the powerful House Financial Services Committee. Your constituent, Amanda Gorman, stole the show, kind of created this, And so I guess my question to you, just to leave real quickly, is if we come back, I want to talk to you a lot more than, just every 4 years. But if we come back in 4 years, do you feel optimistic that this thing that we're just kind of going on, and this is going to still be, do you think we will have moved some of the tectonics of this debate significantly, given where, are you optimistic or are you cynical?
Well, I have to tell you this. I am the eternal optimist, and I have to be in the work that I do, knowing what I know and having experienced what I've experienced. In order to do this work, I've got to believe that it makes a difference somehow. And no matter how small it is, that every day I must wake up, believing that I and others can do something to make things better. So I'm always optimistic in spite of the disappointments that I may confront. I go to bed at night, and oftentimes I am thoroughly disgusted at what I experienced that day. But a good night's sleep, I wake up the next morning ready to go and thinking I'm going to do something to help create change today. And so I'm an optimist.
Well, Representative Maxine Waters, chair of the House Financial Services Committee, I want to talk to you both about this issue. I want to have you back and talk about banking and finance and FICO scores and all that, which we get into. Real pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it, and I'm so pleased that you're going to do something with Charles Blow and I, okay?
Excellent. We'll do that. Well, that brings us to the end of our first session today. A big thank you to Alexion Pharmaceuticals for its support of this program, and to all of you in the audience for joining us for this first hour. We're not done yet. Stretch your legs, check your email, grab a bite to head out and eat. I'm probably going to go run around the block and eat some celery or something. It's about time. We're going to be back at 1:30 p.m. with my colleague Marty. We'll be speaking with Martin Luther King III, changemaker Van Jones, Professor Michael Eric Dyson, powerful, for discussions on rebuilding societal structures for equity. I'm Steve Clemons, and he's Marty. We'll see you soon.